Welcome back to Water Cooler Talk, sponsored by Grand Falls Casino and Golf Resort. We are talking Summit League hoops today because the Summit League regular season is winding down. Next week already marks the final week of regular season play with the tournament starting on March 3rd. So a little bit later, we're going to have Tom Nieman and Jay Elsen join us. But right now, we are starting in West Fargo with Mr. Brian Sean. So Sean, the NDSU men, 4-game losing streak right now, uncharacteristic of them. But what do the last 3 conference games mean in terms of that after coming off all these losses?
Well, I think it means a lot for North Dakota State because this is going to be their last home game in conference coming up on Saturday against Fort Wayne, who right now is in 3rd place but is only a game ahead of North Dakota State, who sits in 7th. But when you look at North Dakota State over the last 3 games in particular, the loss to USD, the loss to Oral Roberts, the loss even on Saturday at Denver, a combined 8 points. You know, A.J. Jacobson had a chance to win the game in regulation, as you can see there, in Tulsa at Oral Roberts. Then all of a sudden, the Bison up 2 with 2 seconds left, and an off-balance 3 at the horn wins the game, 67-66 in OT for Oral Roberts. So it's been that kind of tough luck that the Bison have had. Paul Miller has the basketball in his hands, has a shot go all the way down and rattle off with the Bison down 1 in the final minute. Denver goes on to hang on by 3. So it's just one of those things where NDSU's been in all these games. They've had a lot of opportunities to win, but they just haven't found a way to do it. So Fort Wayne coming Saturday, huge matchup certainly before the last road trip at Omaha in Western Illinois.
Yeah, that is going to be a big one. But meanwhile, Tom Nieman, Jay Elsen have been covering some teams that I guess are doing a little bit better, SDSU and USD. But Tom, we're going to start with you. Of course, the big rivalry games coming up next week for both the men and the women. It feels like forever ago, the last time they played, but how have you seen, let's start with the men, these teams develop or change since the last time the Jacks and the Coyotes met up?
Yeah, it seems like it was last week, actually. I mean, it's been a while since South Dakota State and South Dakota played each other, but yeah, for the men especially, I think David Jenkins Jr., the freshman for South Dakota State, is a big key to this game coming up against South Dakota. Jenkins in this game in Vermillion really started a 3-game slump in his freshman season. Reed Tellinghusen didn't play very well. They've needed both of those guys in all the wins they've had this year. Mike Dahm was a little limited as well. He forced things a little bit in this game, but he has gotten back to a little smoother keel. And the Jacks are not taking as many threes. They're really more focused, more intentional, as TJ Otzelberger likes to say, offensively. And they've just settled in a little bit. They're taking better shots. They're more aware of what's going on, like Otz has talked about all year. But I think David Jenkins Jr. has really played well in the last 3. See if he'll continue that when they meet the Coyotes coming up next week. But again, the Jacks got 1 game this weekend against Western Illinois. They get by that, and then South Dakota coming up. So it's just little subtle changes for the SDSU men that they've gotten a little bit better at since that loss to USD.
Now, what about for the women? Because we were talking off camera. They seem like they're trying to prove a point here. 95-plus points in 4 of the last 6 games. They're really taking it to some teams. How have they developed?
Offensively, they've just been lights out, and that has not been an issue at all for Aaron Johnston. He says, yeah, we're really scoring well. He's not real happy with how they're playing defensively right now, but he's nitpicking a little bit. But there's just more balance. This game in Brookings, when USD came in and won 67-61, Macy Miller, Maddie Giebert played very well. You see Tagan Larson here. They didn't get a lot inside for the Jacks, but that is what has changed in the last 2 weeks for South Dakota State. Aaron Johnston, their head coach, says we've gotten away from setting things up for Macy and for Maddie Giebert, and we're letting these other players get involved more. And Ellie Thompson has really played well. Tylee Irwin has really played well. Lexi Alexander, Tagan Larson, all those secondary players to the Stars for South Dakota State have really come on in the last 2 weeks because they've opened it up a little bit and let them shine a little bit. Yeah. Maya Sellen didn't play the first time around for South Dakota State when they played USD. She will play coming up next week in this rematch. That'll make a difference for the Jackrabbits, and it should be really good games on both sides.
Definitely looking forward to those. Well, the other side of the matchups, the Yotes, the men and the women, have actually secured a top 2 seed for the Summit League tournament, which is going to be here in about 3 minutes. And you were down at USD this morning talking to the coaches. What is the confidence like there right now, Jay?
Well, I think obviously they're feeling pretty good about themselves. I mean, this was kind of the expectation, especially on the men's side. I mean, they felt like they should be here. If not the 1 seed, then certainly in the top 2. And so to have that part of the equation kind of off the table for them, no longer have to worry about it. Obviously, with 3 games left, a lot can happen still. But they know regardless of what happens, they're going to play on that first day of the tournament, and with an extended break at the end of the regular season, getting that first game out of the way at the tournament right away on Saturday, they're happy about that because Craig Smith likes to play games. He's not going to get to do that a whole lot over the last week of the regular season. So from that standpoint, the men are very excited. There have been some ups and downs, both offensively and defensively, that they've been trying to work through, but certainly their last outing against Fort Wayne was pretty impressive. They've actually had 3 straight games now where they've had at least a 19-point lead at halftime. So that's, you're setting yourself up pretty well if you're able to do that. Just need to close it out, play a full 40 defensively, and I think once they get there, if they get there by the end of the regular season, they're going to feel really good about where they're at heading into the tournament.
How about the women, though?
Yeah, the women, I think, it's been impressive to see how they've done it. They're so efficiently. I think in terms of field goal percentage offensively right now, Don Plitzwhite said they're like 6th in the country in terms of efficiency on the offensive end. That's crazy good, obviously. And they've had 8 games out of 11 in the Summit League tournament where they've held their opponents to 61 points or less. I mean, that's an incredible feat right there. And one of those wins is against a very, very, very good South Dakota State team. Now, they're going to have their hands full. Certainly this next round, the Jacks, as Tom mentioned, are going to be at full strength. And they're playing really well. I think, they kind of poked the bear a little bit there with the way they played up in Brookings. SDSU is going to come into that game with a little bit more to prove. And so they're going to certainly have to have their A games on both ends of the floor if they want to complete that season sweep next week.
But that's what they did in Brookings. The USD women were just big and strong, and defensively they knocked South Dakota State off the spots, didn't let them go where they wanted to go. And that's what AJ said, is we've been scoring 90 in all these games lately, but we're going to have to learn how to win a game in the 60s, which is probably what it's going to be.
Much more likely.
Grind it out. Those are sometimes the hardest games to be in as a player, but they're fun games to watch occasionally. Well, we're going to talk about seeding for the upcoming tournaments because at our cubicles, we're breaking down all the tiebreakers and everything. Obviously, USD and SDSU, or the USD women and men, both have a top 2 seed for sure. But how about everyone else? I mean, Jay, you have about 500 papers out here.
It's such an easy thing to break down, right? Tom and I have been talking about how there's even a possibility where on the women's side, it could come all the way down to RPI, determining who gets the first seed and who gets the second seed. Not ideal, but it's just the way it is, and that's because SDSU and USD have asserted themselves at the top of this league to such a degree that really everybody else is playing for third at this point, and we know that. And SDSU hasn't officially locked up a top 2 seed, but surely that feels like it's coming here, if not Wednesday, Thursday, definitely by Saturday. So, not a lot needs to be determined at the top, just who's going to be 1 and who's going to be 2. But on both sides, you could say that men and women. It's just 1 and 2, obviously USD, SDSU, and then beyond that, it's about anybody's guess, especially on the men's side.
Well, Brian, I mean, last year NDSU got upset in the first round of the tournament. They're riding this losing streak that we talked about, but what do you expect, seeding-wise or anything from them for the men in these next few weeks, I guess?
Well, it's always interesting to me when you start looking at matchups. I mean, depending on where things shook out, I mean, you could have North Dakota State, again, they're a game out of 3rd place, but also right now tied for 7th place. We've seen how crazy the first 2 matchups were with South Dakota and North Dakota State. That could be your first round game in Sioux Falls, which would be very, very interesting to see. So matchups are one thing. Who's playing really well the last 2 weeks of the season is another thing. We saw South Dakota State get really hot in the last 3 weeks of the season last year and really ride that momentum all the way through the tournament. And certainly having the home fans there, I think, really does help South Dakota and South Dakota State. And the women's side, don't overlook the fact that getting the top seed still means a little bit more. Yes, you're going to still have to win 2 games to get to the championship, but if you're the 2 seed and you got to play Western Illinois compared to the top seed having to play Oral Roberts or potentially Denver, and Oral Roberts looking like they may be without Maria Martianez here the rest of the year, that is a very different semifinal matchup against a team in the Leathernecks that won this tournament last year and have plenty of confidence in what they do.
I love it.
I really think on the women's side, though, it's going to be SDSU and USD.
Yeah.
They're on a collision course to meet in the championship. On the men's side, it's quite a bit more up in the air, I think. SDSU, USD will be the top 2 seeds, but North Dakota State is going to be a dangerous team because the season hasn't gone the way they wanted to this year, so they want to make a little statement in the tournament and knock somebody out that doesn't think they should be knocked out. Fort Wayne and Denver on the men's side are going to be really dangerous games in the tournament, so the men's side is going to be really up in the air, whereas the women's side, I think, is going to be a little more streamlined between the Coyotes and the Jackets.
And that's what's really wild to me is how little consistency there's been beyond SDSU and USD to this point. Literally, Fort Wayne can look like a potential championship team, or they could look like an 8 seed, depending on the night. And Bryson Scott has a lot to do with it. If he's hitting shots, and John Conchar has been a little bit more involved lately, when those guys have been clicking together, suddenly that team looks like an awfully tough out. But when they play selfish basketball, that's a little bit different story. They're pretty easy to beat.
Same with Denver, same with North Dakota State. We've seen the Bison shoot it lights out, shoot 60%, and beat some teams. So those three teams are going to be really dangerous.
All right, March Madness coming up. We can't wait for it. Thank you so much, guys.
You bet.
All right, coming up after the break, we will send it up to North Dakota. Jody Norstead has your North Dakota High School recap. Stay right here.